Intimidator 305, new at King's Dominion. Inspired by Dale Earnhardt, it's the biggest, baddest, meanest coaster on the East Coast. A fitting tribute to the world's greatest driver. Intimidator 305, new this summer at King's Dominion. The legend rides on.
There is one name in the roller coaster industry that strikes fear into the hearts of riders more than any other. Intimidator 305. With a towering reputation to back up its truly impressive stats, this massive and imposing Giga coaster has become a magnet for controversy. Compared to other controversial rides like Magnum XL 200, however, rides which have their fair share of lovers and detractors in both the enthusiast community and the general public, Intimidator 305 is a unique case. It's a ride that stands alone, almost universally adored by enthusiasts and hated by the general public. Okay, maybe hate isn't the best word to describe it. The more accurate emotion would be fear. This ride is insane. A blackout machine whipping its riders around with heretofore unforeseen ferocity. And the general public has a right to be scared, given the spate of news stories, injuries, and design changes leaving Intimidator 305 with a uniquely frightening reputation. While other coasters of similar stature like Millie and Fury continue to demand prodigious lines at their respective parks, King's Dominion's biggest investment remains, on all but the busiest of days, a ghost town. It is impossible to not recognize that Intimidator 305 was a failure, for both Cedar Fair and the ride's manufacturer, Intamin. Some would even go as far to call I-305 a death blow to King's Dominion, once a crown jewel of the Paramount Parks chain, now reduced to eating scraps off the free spin table. But is that true? Why did Intimidator 305 go too far? And will we ever see a ride like this again? The answer is no. But before we continue, another frightening update. My sources have told me that the true Iron Menace coming to Dorney Park is none other than former Six Flags CEO Selim, who is working with the recently revived DIN Corporation to build a giant mechanical Gundam suit that'll take up residence in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and threaten local enthusiasts who attempt to claim that Phoenix is better than Thunderhawk. Please like and subscribe to the channel to gain access to Dorney Park's coveted DMs, so you can join me on my quest to access the Iron Menace construction site and put a stop to this madness. Thank you. A long time ago, I was, believe it or not, a NASCAR kid. In fact, I'm a pretty big car guy. That part of my life just got put on the back burner for a while due to the fact that I am a poor grad student and I am stuck driving a fucking Ford Focus. Back in the 90s though, my cousins and I would gather to watch NASCAR races every weekend. And there was one driver I absolutely idolized above all else, Dale Earnhardt. Earnhardt was not only one of the greatest drivers NASCAR had ever seen, winning a staggering 7 NASCAR Cup championships and remaining a truly elite driver all the way through his 40s, but he was a deservedly feared presence on the grid. He was an offensive driver, never afraid to trade pain, and his relentless pursuit of victory above all else led drivers to christen him, well, the Intimidator. Now people forget this as time dulls the sharper edges of history, but other drivers were legitimately scared of the dude. You didn't fuck with Dale Earnhardt. And is there a more fitting tribute to the man who struck fear into NASCAR drivers the world over than Intimidator 305? The ferocious Giga remains one of the few roller coasters that can leave even the most seasoned enthusiast veterans quaking in their boots. And here's the funny thing, this reputation is completely deserved. It is seemingly fate that Cedar Fair, having recently purchased Paramount's King's Dominion in the late 2000s, would tap into the legacy of the late great Earnhardt in their effort to push the roller coaster to its limit, 8 years after the tragic accident that took Earnhardt's life far too soon on the banks of Daytona International Speedway. Like its namesake, King's Dominion's new Giga would lead to fear, respect, and tragedy. In the 1990s and 2000s, there were 3 major players in the non-Disney amusement park space: Six Flags, Cedar Fair, and the plucky upstart Paramount Parks, forming in 1993 from the ashes of Taft Broadcasting and the bizarre and short-lived Marriott amusement chain. The Paramount brand was how I first met King's Dominion, growing up and passing the park with the big road sign on trips back up 95 from Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And while they had my first major white whale, the inimitable Volcano the Blast Coaster, there were no indications that something as wild as I-305 was on the horizon. In 2006, the new Paramount CEO wanted to get the hell out of the amusement park market, so they put their 5 properties, King's Dominion included, up for sale. Cedar Fair, the winning bidder, nearly doubled their park properties with the Paramount merger, pushing them into new areas of the market that they had not tapped before. And now, with this new portfolio, it was time to make some waves. Cedar Fair would quickly make big expansions in 2 of their largest new parks, King's Dominion and the also newly acquired Carowinds, with towering new roller coasters that comfortably cleared 200 feet. But unlike what the company would do for its sister park down the road, Cedar Fair was about to whip its Dick Kinzel out in Doswell, Virginia, building a ride that would truly live up to the legacy that the name Intimidator carried. For the hyperless King's Dominion, Cedar Fair wouldn't stop at 200 feet, no. This Intimidator would be a full-circuit Giga coaster, the world's 3rd and the largest roller coaster on the entire eastern seaboard not named Kingda Ka. And it would take the formula established by the first 2 Gigas and throw it out completely. Gone were the towering camelbacks and graceful turnarounds that defined Millie and Morgan before. In its place was a ground-hugging speed machine, careening through its comparatively brief layout with no hint of mercy until the final brakes. This was going to be the baddest ride anyone had ever seen. Now, no doubt this ride was more than a little bit inspired by Maverick, Intamin's 2007 runaway success at Cedar Point, which eschewed long, drawn-out airtime hills and floaty inversions for tight, snappy elements. It was a major change of course for the coaster industry. And despite a modest, sub-100-foot height, Maverick had no problem scoring Amusement Today's Golden Ticket Award for Best New Ride, and it continues to be a massive crowd-pleaser 15 years later. To many, Maverick, and the 2008 financial crash, let's not forget about that, marked the end of the legendary Coaster Wars, where parks constantly competed to grab the coveted title of the world's tallest and fastest ride. And while that is giving Maverick a little bit too much credit in my opinion, there is no doubt that Intamin's revolutionary creation was a watershed moment in coaster design. In 2009, the newly born Cedar Fair amusement juggernaut teamed up again with the ambitious Intamin, and the two asked a simple question. What if we take the frenetic pacing, snappy transitions, and general intensity of Maverick and put it on a Giga coaster? Now, they did not know it yet, but the result, Intimidator 305, would itself become a watershed moment in coaster history, just not in the way that Cedar Fair or Intamin expected. I keep coming back to one question: why? One could argue that the chain, having just acquired many new properties, was looking to make a statement, and they were in a great position to strike with Six Flags' recent financial difficulties. But it's not like Six Flags, or any of the other park chains in the country for that matter, had a Giga of their own. And Cedar Fair's own Giga, Millennium Force, continued to be a critical and commercial success a decade later. So why change the formula? The only explanation that I could square up links back to the proposed coaster's namesake and his famed aggression. By acquiring King's Dominion, Cedar Fair gave itself a second reason to go big, residing just a few miles down the road, a short hour's drive from the former Paramount property. And Cedar Fair was ready to trade some paint. Since its founding, King's Dominion had been locked in competition with the celebrated Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and the two traded punches frequently, locking themselves in a decades-long war to determine who has the best arrow looper in Virginia. It's Anaconda, BT dubs. But while King's Dominion struggled through the past 15 years with misfires like the unreliable Volcano, may it rest in peace, and the awfully short-lived Hypersonic XLC, Busch Gardens took a more conservative approach, and it paid off with rides like Apollo's Chariot, Alpengeist, Dragonspiral, and the towering new dive coaster Griffin. King's Dominion's ammo from Cedar Fair up to this point had consisted of a single relocated floorless, and that just wasn't enough. If KD really wanted to bring the fight to Busch Gardens, their latest investment had to leapfrog their competitor, and what better way to do that than to build the tallest and fastest gravity-driven roller coaster on the East Coast. And that makes for a good narrative, but isn't actually true? I don't know. What we can ascertain with authority is that this gargantuan Giga cannot be interpreted as anything but a display of monstrous ego. This was a different time though, a time when Cedar Fair wasn't afraid to push the boundaries and take some risks. Maverick was a gamble, and it paid dividends in quick order. Millennium Force was a risk too, probably the best risk that Dick Kinzel ever made. But with these sorts of gambles, sometimes you're going to get a dragster. That's just the name of the game. Like Dragster though, a ride like I-305 had absolutely no precedent. Unbeknownst to the world, Cedar Fair and Intamin had unwittingly opened Pandora's box, and once the evil had escaped, there was no turning back. Opening on time on April 1st, 2010, a mere 7 months after the project's initial announcement, Intimidator 305 was met with insane hype on its media day.
And I also want to introduce you to Jeff here, because Jeff is with CoastForBuzz.com. He flew all the way from Seattle.
Seattle, 2,500 miles. And my newborn son.
Left his first newborn.
What a fucking Chad.
Well, Ken is an acer. That's someone that is an American coaster enthusiast. He represents the Mid-Atlantic region, and we are getting what is called an ERT, right?
What is this place?
The refuge of the damned.
The American coaster enthusiasts.
Finally!
This poor news anchor is
One of us!
And the initial reviews were positive?
Absolutely amazing. My eyes are watering. This is an amazing ride.
Coming into the park this morning, I mean, you look at the coaster, you know, it looks big, and you're like, yeah, it looks kind of cool. But I tell you, after I got off of it, holy crap. And what was going on in my mind is a different word than the one I just used, but I'm trying to keep it, you know, at least PG-13.
When you drop over and then going through that first transition at 94 miles an hour, it really is a very, very thrilling ride.
Here's my take. You could save a whole lot of money and not get a facelift if you just ride in the front seat.
Enthusiasts lauded its pure power and frenetic pacing, a sentiment that was echoed by the Earnhardts, Kinzel, and our little Liechtensteinian evil villain who was the mastermind behind the project.
When I got that the first time and rode it, my conclusion was that we got the right ride for the park because they wanted to have an Intimidator. And while I never sat in Dale Earnhardt's car during a race, I imagined that could be something like that.
The Washington Post described the swift descent up the cable lift hill like being shot out of a cannon, and that was before you even went over the first drop. The ride afterwards was unhinged. Radar gun readings on Media Day clocked the ride at a blistering 96 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour faster than the projected speed, and some even say the ride was occasionally kissing 100. The pacing was furious. The few airtime moments were absolutely savage, and lots of attention was given to the pummeling turn after the first drop, taken at maximum speed. Maybe too much attention. You all know what's coming next, don't you? People started blacking out. In droves. You see this? This is the face of a man who realized that he just fucked up. Time for a little science lesson from your friendly neighborhood engineering professor. Today we're here to answer one simple question. Why the hell does Intimidator 305 keep knocking people unconscious? And the answer, thankfully, is quite simple. It's the forces. Of course it's the forces, what the fuck? Now it may shock you to learn, but the human body was designed to work on planet Earth, where there's one constant force acting upon us: gravity. And our bodies, you may also be surprised to know, have adapted to deal with gravity. Now, gravity actually has a pretty significant effect on our blood flow. In fact, the heart of a normal person needs 22 millimeters of mercury, or about 1/6 of our systolic blood pressure, to send enough blood flow up into the brain. But I know, what does this have to do with roller coasters? Let's discuss an example we've all been through. Ever wake up in the morning, get out of bed a little bit too quickly, and suddenly you feel lightheaded, your vision goes fuzzy, and you lose your balance? This is a phenomenon known as orthostatic hypotension, and it's pretty similar to what happens when you gray out on a roller coaster. When you're lying down, your heart does not need to pump against gravity, so it slows down and relaxes a bit. When you get up quickly and suddenly reintroduce that 22 millimeter mercury demand, the heart isn't pumping enough blood to the brain, and you start to lose consciousness. But your body's built to react to a situation like this, so it tells the blood vessels in the brain to constrict and the heart to pump faster, and eventually the lightheadedness goes away. Now, a similar thing happens when we expose our body to G-forces. The heart has to work harder to pump blood up to the brain. So at 2 Gs, instead of needing to pump 22 millimeters of mercury of pressure, the heart has to pump 44. 3 Gs, 66. 4 Gs, the G-force sustained by I-305 in that initial turn, 88 millimeters of mercury, literally higher than your own resting blood pressure. Now, the heart can't keep up with this demand, and as blood begins to pool down in your legs, the oxygen level in your brain starts to drop, and your vision starts to grow fuzzy. We have now entered the gray out zone, or to use the more cooler and more technical fighter pilot-y term, almost loss of consciousness, or ALOC. Now, the real culprit here isn't necessarily the force itself, but the duration. In fact, you regularly exceed the G-forces exerted by a roller coaster every single day, when you plop yourself into a chair, for instance. That was 10 Gs? In situations like sitting down in your chair, everything happens so fast that the G-forces have barely any time to affect your blood flow, and so you don't gray out. Let's look at this plot from a paper published by Verum et al. To see how G-force duration affects our oxygen levels in the brain. And like I predicted, a quick pulse leads to a smaller drop, around 3% after a second of exposure, but as exposure time increases, blood oxygen levels decrease linearly. After 5 seconds of exposure at 6 Gs, blood oxygen levels have dropped by almost 6%, which is more than enough to comfortably put every single test subject into ALOC. Now, many other studies back up this hypothesis that G-force duration is the main predictor of ALOC in human beings. And hell, the forces don't even need to be that high to have a big effect. In fact, a study measuring a sustained G-force of only 1.5 G, which is just half a G more than normal gravity, revealed that mean cerebral blood flow velocity dropped by as much as 10%. But 1.5 G isn't gray-out worthy. The real crazy moments come from combining exposure time with strong forces, power, and sustain together in unholy matrimony. And that is what makes I-305 so fearsome. Other roller coasters show higher G-forces. Let's not forget about Tower of Terror at Gold Reef City or Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas, both of which hit 6 Gs. But I-305 holds a damn strong 4 Gs of force for multiple seconds, and that's what leads to the grayouts. And let me remind you too, that it was worse when it opened. Quote, "This coaster is not for the casual theme park goer, and that goes for the average run-of-the-mill NASCAR fan as well. This is somewhat unfortunate given the proximity of this ride to Richmond International Raceway and a large local contingent of motorsports enthusiasts. Rather, Intimidator 305 is a coaster that'll be known for speed and intensity, perhaps more intensity than even the most seasoned coaster fan is accustomed to experiencing. As well, the high-speed, head-jarring crossovers will catch many first-time riders by surprise." Russell Meyer, April 2nd, 2010. The initial fanfare made out I-305 as a towering achievement, but it was obvious even on media day the coaster had maybe gone too far. On opening day, the next day, the narrative quickly changed. Multiple riders were coming forward with complaints about losing consciousness in that absolutely brutal turn after the first drop, and the stream of initial complaints quickly gave way to a days-long deluge. Take this source with a grain of salt, but according to a supposed statement from King's Dominion I found in a 10-year-old forum, medical staff were seeing 15 to 20 people per day, with medical issues resulting directly from Intimidator 305. A few people had legitimate neck and shoulder pain, more on that later, while others felt disoriented by the experience or just completely blacked out. And while decades of research have shown that short-term ALOC is not dangerous, at least in healthy individuals, trying to explain that to a casual park-goer who just unwillingly lost consciousness for half a minute. The problems, unfortunately, extended beyond the passengers. Not only was Intimidator 305 literally sucking the life out of its riders, it was also sucking the wallets of King's Dominion. The wheels provided by Intamin, which were initially projected to last up to 14 days, were not up to the task of surviving I-305's forceful onslaught. The trains would chew through a full set of wheels in a single day, and this problem would soon become a massive maintenance cost that Cedar Fair and King's Dominion did not want to bear. Something had to be done, and fast. So, in a fit of desperation, King's Dominion did the unthinkable. They installed a trim brake on the first drop. And with this absolute gimp play, Cedar Fair took down the top speed of the ride by about 10 miles an hour. Like, I don't need to explain to you, this absolutely neutered the ride, which was not designed in any way to be trimmed like this. The sole benefit was getting to avoid the absolutely disgusting trim on the return run airtime hill, but that trade-off was absolutely not worth it. Thusies, as you could expect, did not like this change. But the GP were finally satisfied with, oh wait, they were still complaining about blackouts. Damn I-305. I know all you wanted to do was cuddle the puppy, it's okay. And if you didn't think the forces were brutal enough on their own, I-305 opened up with the patented Intamin hard over-the-shoulder bars and just Jesus Christ. There's a reason why these restraints are an endangered species. Any sharp transition would absolutely clothesline your neck, it was terrible. And the bar was placed just far enough from where your neck rests to ensure you have a heap of momentum going as you slam into the unforgiving bar with every transition. Thankfully, these horrid torture devices had a mercifully short shelf life, being replaced with the padded vest design seen on Maverick and other soon renovated Intamins in early July. But this change was too little too late. Despite the optimism and fanfare at the beginning of the season, despite the record-breaking stats, despite the bold new direction, it was clear to fans and casual parkgoers alike that Intamin and Cedar Fair fumbled the bag. As the lines began to drain and the once shiny new attraction continually dropped in popularity even after the changes, how the hell was KD going to fix this? In previous decades, before the advent of computer-aided design, it was common for manufacturers to modify roller coasters shortly after opening, with the addition of trim brakes and occasional reprofiles. But Intimidator 305 would be the first major steel roller coaster in years to get a complete reprofile. The nearly deadly first turn was modified significantly, rising off the ground and ascending to the first airtime hill much more quickly than the original design. Now, while this reprofile did not increase the diameter of the turnaround, the earlier ascent slowed down the train more quickly, and thus reduced the sustain with the still present high G-forces. The reprofile is nearly imperceptible on ride, but far-field shots show off the somewhat wonky-looking change pretty well. It's easy to see where the new track joins the original profile of the first airtime hill with this weird little bump. But a little aesthetic quirk was more than a fair price to change for the much more important secondary addition: the removal of the first drop trim, and the return of i305 to its original speed and glory. But did this change work? Was the beast finally tamed? Kind of. The reprofile did have its intended effect, reducing the sustained power of that mad 4G turn, but even a drastic change like this couldn't truly tame this unhinged ride. The Intimidator, even neutered, was still out for blood, and one lap on this beast even today is enough to get you intimately familiar with its savagery. Our ride on Intimidator 305 starts with the most hype coaster intro of all time.
Gentlemen, start your engine! Oh yeah, let's go!
Before the cable lift yanks you skyward, and I mean yank, the train flies out of the station up the wickedly steep incline, climbing and climbing to what feels like a vast ocean of sky. You're facing away from the park, and the lift is so steep that the world just disappears around you once you pierce the tree line. It's just you, the track, the train, and the foreboding knowledge that you are about to have your innards rearranged. Only when you crest the lift hill does the sheer scale of i305 really sink in. The front row riders hang over in suspended disbelief, while back row riders have the briefest of moments to process the chaos before being flung over that first drop. Now, some people have said that i305's first drop is one of the weaker Giga drops, and I can't necessarily disagree. It doesn't have the amazing impact of Millie's, and the comfort collar restraint is no B&M clamshell, but that's being real nitpicky. i305 offers sustained and solid ejector in the back of the train as you hurtle over that first drop and face your doom. And now, we've come to the turn. Given the ride's continued reputation, it would not surprise you to know that despite Intamin and KD's best efforts, this 270-degree helix is still far too strong. The positives pin you down into your seat with a ferocity matched by few other rides. Your legs turn to jelly almost instantly, and any vain attempt to put your hands up through the duration of the element is met by a bitch slap from gravity. Of course, as I mentioned before, the real rub here is the sustain, because the positives never seem to end. Even though you are hurtling around at nearly 100 miles an hour, mere feet off the ground, it feels like time slows down as you are encased in positive G carbonite. And there's another sensation you feel on the first turnaround, the sensation of silence. No other ride is this quiet after a 300-foot drop. Screams of glee and terror that you would expect from normal rides are replaced by an overwhelming sensation of helplessness as the collective consciousness of the train gets sucked out of their bodies. You have two choices: tense up your muscles, hold your breath, and fight to avoid the seemingly inevitable grayout, or give in and let the first turn make you its bitch. I recommend the latter.
Don't ask me what happens right here, no one truly knows.
Hopefully, though, you're able to regain your senses before i305 finishes its spiral ascent and careens through a long, sustained airtime hill, which looks absolutely puny juxtaposed against the gargantuan truss structure of the lift hill. And maybe no one is conscious enough to truly appreciate this, but this thing slaps. Everyone on the train is treated to multiple seconds of seemingly endless ejector airtime, neutered ever so slightly by the shoulder pad restraints, but more than sufficient to jolt most of the riders back to life. Mercifully, the gentleish turn out of the airtime hill back to ground level provides enough respite from the initial assault to allow its riders to recover from the turn and prepare for the rest of the ride, taking place almost entirely at ground level and never rising more than a third above its original height. And you're still traveling well above 80 miles an hour here. Next up comes, oh shit, what's this? An airtime hill? But I thought I-305 had no airtime. Dear viewer, I'm here to tell you that anyone who says something to that effect is a dirty little liar. Still, this hill feels a little bit like a tame aside. The steady is a blink and you'll miss it moment as the track quickly unbanks and gives the whole train a nice little ejector pop. Afterwards, the train is quickly slung into another bone-crushing helix, mercifully a bit shorter and less powerful than the legendary first turnaround. And then, you come to the snaps. Ooh, the snaps. Besides the 270-degree consciousness killer, these whippy snaps are perhaps the most famous party trick in I-305's arsenal, for good reason. And these violent directional changes make up the backbone of the next section of I-305. It is a masterclass in contrast. The train rapidly shifts from positives to whips as the train fiercely banks from one direction to the other, flinging riders out of the train with perfectly heartline precision. The sensation is a bit difficult to describe, but the closest thing I can compare it to is airtime, combined with the rapid, whippy acceleration of a snappy invert zero-G roll. In my opinion, it's thrill junkie nirvana. Now the second snap is a bit more gradual than the first and the third, but it's still more than enough to throw riders from their seats, and here you quickly begin to understand why these comfort collars are a bit of a necessary evil. And this is coming from me. I don't think over-the-shoulders are necessary on like anything. With forces this wild and a bunch of unconscious GPers along for the ride, I do not doubt that a T-bar would lead to some heads becoming detached from their bodies. This sequence concludes with another low turnaround, mirroring the original and providing another dose of strong and sustained positive Gs. And that leads into my least favorite part of the ride. The trim brake. I fucking hate this thing. Not for its existence, but for its character and for its placement. Frankly, if a ride ever needed to have a trim brake, it's this one, and there would be far too much momentum going into the final brakes without it. But it's a fixed magnetic trim on the ascent of an airtime hill. I'll let ElToroRyan speak a little bit about why this is so annoying.
Fixed magnetic brakes will slow down an empty train far more than a fully loaded train. The trim brakes on the second airtime hill were absolutely designed into the ride to make the last few hills workable with the space provided and budget provided. There is no question about that, but I just wish that some of the brake fins on the hill were adjustable. With the ride having a pretty good capacity and also not being very popular, trains are often dispatched in I-305 close to empty, at least when I ride. Even with an empty train, the ride tears through the course like no other until it hits that trim brake. With the lack of weight, the train feels like it slows down to a near crawl, which just kills the remaining hills of the ride for me. And it kills me because I know how good the last few hills of the ride are with a fully loaded train, but I can never seem to get a ride in I-305 with a fully loaded train.
Like ElToroRyan said, fixed trims like this offer no level of control. In contrast, I rode Fury 325 on 2 separate occasions with this variable trim. The trim hit pretty noticeably on an 85-degree summer afternoon, but we sailed through that trim brake on my next visit, which is overcast and in the 50s. But on I-305, it doesn't matter if you're on an empty train in April or dying of heat stroke on a Saturday in July. It's gonna hit, and it's gonna hit hard. In fact, with the reduced momentum of a slower ride, you're going to get braked more. Not only does this trim thoroughly neuter the final sequence on a colder day, but the way it hits just infuriates me, always clamping down with excessive force right before the crest of a great airtime hill. Now this is goddamn I-305, just like put it in the valley. Somewhere else, anywhere else. Nitro does fine with its trims on the bottom of the valley. Do you really want me to compare you to Nitro I-305? Okay, but I can usually stop my blood from boiling enough to enjoy the following camelback, which is, and you're not going to believe this, another great airtime hill. I don't want to belabor this point too much, as the ride is less focused on airtime than other rides of its ilk, but when I-305 does give airtime, it's always great. Still, from this point on, the momentum of the ride has been noticeably sapped. Even though you're probably going like 50 at this point, it feels like you're crawling, and that's how well the ride warps your sense of speed. Don't think that you're out of I-305's crushing grip just yet. The resultant valley leads into another good airtime hill, which banks right over the earlier helix and leads into the most violent snap on the ride. This right here, this is why the trim brake needs to exist. Given the speed reduction, it's almost like you're going through this whip in slow motion, though the force attempting to dislodge your body from your seat is still just as strong. I cannot imagine how insane this element would be trimless. It would probably kill you. Right before the ride careens mercifully into the final brakes, I-305 twists one more time past 90 degrees and unravels like a coiled snake. pairing one more final jolt of laterals with a smidge of airtime before forcefully slowing down. And the final brakes really put I-305's pacing into perspective. Though the final sequence feels positively glacial juxtaposed against the frenzy of the rest of the ride, the brakes require a pretty damn hefty shove to slow down the train's still prodigious momentum. So does the neutered post-2011 I-305 still live up to its reputation? Hell yeah, it does. Unlike the other Gigas out there, I-305 feels relatively short. The near mile of track disappears in a flash, but for once I'm not mad about this. It's honestly a mercy with such furious pacing and pummeling forces that the ride doesn't go longer. Now I enjoy me a good ride marathon, but there are a few rides out there that are too much for even me to take in repeated doses, and Intimidator 305 is one of them. Just ask me how I know. Maybe it really is too much. Dale Earnhardt died of a basilar skull fracture during a crash at the 2001 Daytona 500. I won't subject you to the crash footage, but if you do decide to watch it, you'll realize that the accident is actually pretty tame looking. Dale had crashed much earlier, many times before, and walked away without a scratch. But Dale wasn't too keen on the new bulky and expensive Hans device and chose to race without it. The premise of a Hans device is simple. It is a safety device used in race cars that locks the back of the head to the rest of a race driver's body. The Hans device is important because in a race car crash, the only part of the body that isn't being restrained in some way is the head, and locking the head to the rest of the body can prevent fatal whiplash. Unfortunately, the very injury the Hans device was made to prevent would happen to Earnhardt. Upon colliding into the barriers, the seatbelt kept Dale's body rigid, but his neck snapped forward, causing a skull fracture. And the unfortunate truth is that Dale's death was entirely preventable. In the wake of a deadly accident forever known as Black Sunday, everything changed. It took a few years for NASCAR to mandate it, but drivers voluntarily and immediately started wearing the Hans device. Safety for both restraints and cars improved in leaps and bounds. They say the regulations are written in blood, and it is a bit reductive to say, but it's not a stretch to claim that the death of the Intimidator made NASCAR racing more safe. Either way, no one can deny that stock car racing was forever changed. There was a NASCAR before Dale Earnhardt and a NASCAR after Dale Earnhardt, and the sport would never be the same. In a similar way, Intimidator 305 changed the coaster industry permanently. This ride went above and beyond everything else, and both Intamin and King's Dominion suffer the consequences. In many ways, the aftermath of I-305's failure meant that the coaster manufacturers would be more conservative in their design choices. The Giga coaster has fallen out of favor, replaced by light on the positives RMCs and LSM-powered multi-launches that seem weak and flighty by comparison. Intamin's status as King of the Hill had begun to crumble, while the less risk-taking B&M took up the mantle as the world's most desirable coaster manufacturer. Instead of catapulting KD to the top of the food chain, Cedar Fair's biggest dick whip would languish in the back of its own park, pushing riders away instead of drawing them in. And King's Dominion, once a park famous for taking risks, for pushing the envelope with groundbreaking innovations like Hypersonic and Volcano, had finally learned their lesson. I-305 was certainly not their first, but it was their biggest mistake. And King's Dominion would never make such a mistake again. But mistakes aren't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, mistakes are often the catalyst for true greatness. Penicillin was a mistake, Postnotes were a mistake, hell, Viagra was a mistake, and millions of people wouldn't be getting their dick hard without it. Cedar Fair made a massive gamble with I-305, and by all accounts it was an utter failure. But the result of this failure is a truly singular experience, a coaster like nothing before that will never be made again. And, much like its celebrated namesake, I-305 will be remembered long after it's gone as the baddest motherfucker around, the Intimidator. And yet, there is another. Oh god damn it! Thank you all so much for watching. This video has been in the works for a while, but as you could probably guess, it was quite the effort, so I hope you all enjoy the final result. This is a ride that means a lot to me, and I hope that kind of shines through in my work. I think it does, at least. Again, a huge thank you to everyone who made the last Crash Course video a huge success. I've gotten over 100 subscribers from that video alone, and to all the new subscribers, thank you so much for hopping in. We are so close to 1,000 subs and the first monetization goal, so if you haven't already, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. Watch some of my other LOG videos, they're probably my favorite videos to put out. In addition, I have my crash courses, which have been a big success lately, my meme videos, and everything else I have on offer. Really looking forward for a great year for the channel, and as always, thank you for watching.